Podcasting from a secret location deep inside the political colossus. This is Radio Free GOP, the voice of the Republican resistance.
Part of the beauty of me is that I'm very rich. Let me tell you, I'm a really smart guy.
What's your name again? John Miller. And you work with Canada? Yes, that's correct.
Oh my God, they've got a madman on their hands.
We will have no truce nor parley with you or the grisly gang who work your wicked will. You do your worst, and we will do our best.
We've come to a turning point, a moment for hard decisions. If not us, who? And if not now, when?
It's 11:59 at Radio Free America, and this is Uncle Sam with music and the truth until dawn. Right now, I got a few words for some of our brothers and sisters in the occupied zone. The chair is against the walls. The chair is against the walls.
This is Radio Free GOP with your host, Mike Murphy.
Donald Trump's week from hell, and now a tax bomb from the New York Times. The upcoming VP debate, will anybody stay awake? And an interview with legendary Democratic consultant Bob Shrum. It's all right here on the podcast. Welcome to Radio Free GOP.
He used to have a big career, but now he's had enough. Podcasting's like therapy. His shrink says it's great stuff. Radio Free GOP.
Well, look, call me Kreskin. This one I saw coming. It's always a safe bet to bet on crazy for Trump, but he really swung for the fences. You got to give the Orange Menace credit. He put quite a week together. As meltdowns go, this is a record setter. First, you lose a debate. Then you go nuts and decide to take your opponent's bait and fall into a trap, fighting a former Miss Universe. Then, when that story peters out, you decide, no, let's keep this alive. I know how to do it. Middle of the night tweets. It's almost as if we should give him an award, because I don't know many people in politics with the raw skill needed to manage to offend women and Latinos simultaneously by attacking a beauty queen over her looks. It was a masterpiece, and he pulled it off. So then we had a couple more days of that. Then, in the big finish of the week from hell for Donald, we had the meltdown in Pennsylvania. He was up doing one of his speeches, which are really therapy for him. I am sure backstage the staff had told him that, sorry, boss, the New York Times has apparently gotten a hold of one of your, wait for it, tax returns. Well, whenever a campaign fights to keep a tax return private, you know something terrible is in it, because you take a lot of hell for not releasing your taxes. So whatever is in the tax return has to provide more political pain than the pain you get for not releasing. Well, we now know the easiest mystery in the world to have figured out. The pain of his tax return is really bad. It appears, through Donald's gift for losing other people's money, this whole good businessman thing is such a crock. Anyway, through his gift for that sort of failure, Donald Trump had tax write-offs that mean it is quite possible he hasn't paid any federal taxes for the last 15 or 20 years. That is amazing. So that's how we're going to begin the week. Now, what Trump did was legal. He took advantage of the system that's there, and that may be his defense. But he could have been more forthright about it. He could have made this a case for tax reform and released everything months ago, using himself as an example of how it's not fair. But that would require political sophistication and strategy, and we know the Trump campaign is a traveling ego show. It's just about Donald getting a crowd and, kind of pathetically, the love of strangers. So where are we now? Trump is a wounded animal. He's cornered, and he's going to watch this week the polls start to get worse. They take about a week to really move. Remember, they measure the past. The first one that's out is the Fox poll that shows Hillary Clinton up about 5 points, 49-44. There's also the LA Times poll that shows Trump still ahead. It has been an outlier. It almost always shows Trump ahead. We'll have a few more in the next 48 hours when we'll see. And I don't think it'll be a Hillary runaway, but as I predicted last week, as I push this Kreskin thing a little farther, I think you will see numbers closer to the Fox poll showing a 4-ish point lead for Hillary Clinton, 5 in the case of Fox. So that, of course, will fuel the fundamental Trump reality, which is when times are tough, Trump goes crazy. That's who he is. The bad debate begat the crazy fight with ex-Miss Universe, which begat again the nutty speech in Pennsylvania, aided by the incendiary news that his tax returns have now leaked, at least one of them, 1 year, to the public. So Trump is not in a good place. Now, meanwhile, in the drama inside the Trump campaign, I think Bannon is now going to be fully in charge. I think the Trump train is heading into Bannonville because Steve Bannon believes all the alt-right stuff, Breitbart News sort of things, that Trump believes. So it's a match made in heaven. They're going to march down to the electoral disaster of swinging the dead cat of scandals and Vince Foster murders and all the other stuff of that ilk, which is not how swing voters are ever going to forgive Donald Trump and consider him a plausible candidate. So I think the errors will compound. The Trump crazy will get bigger, and we're going to have a huge finish to this thing, but not a particularly good one for the Republican nominee. Now, the media loves the process narrative of, oh, the wise staffers, if only they'd be listened to. That's because the media's sources are mostly the wise staffers. But Trump doesn't really have wise staffers. He has these kind of yes men around him and women who try to nudge him in the right direction. I think Kellyanne does to the extent of her abilities do that. But there isn't really a strong staff with a strong campaign or any of the mechanics we normally have. There's a traveling advance show and King Trump atop it all doing pretty much whatever he wants. So the idea that the media often has that, oh, this will be the week the staff gets him on track, he's going to pivot, how many times we hear that, all that stuff, it's a fantasy based on what they've seen in other more normal campaigns. You got to remember that Trump staff are people who've never worked at the big time in American politics. Now, that often isn't the worst thing. You get fresh thinking with new people. But this staff is akin to, well, look, let's say here in Los Angeles, where our current undisclosed location is, we were to go out into the bright sunlight and take a little drive over the San Fernando Valley, which is the headquarters of the mighty porn industry. And we were to pull up at, say, Vivid Video and climb to the second floor of their warehouse, ask for the person in charge and say, hey, Pornmeister, guess what? You're now the president of Warner Brothers. Oh boy, the Pornmeister would be happy. Finally, they figured it out. I've been wanting that job. They're finally going for some real talent, not those fools who think they know how to run a movie studio. And the happy Pornmeister would decamp to Warner Brothers and immediately make the world's first $500 million porno film. So that's the Trump campaign. These are people who've never really been at the top level and frankly don't really know, at least most of them, what to do. But ultimately, it doesn't matter because they're not in charge. Trump's crazy is in charge, which is why whenever he's stimulated by the staffers saying, hey, they got your tax returns, he will go unscrew his head in front of a crowd and do crazy stuff and then dig in. So I think this week could be just as bad as the last. Now, the person with the real Excedrin headache right now is Mike Pence. He was a normal Republican, respected conservative, governor of a real state, and a guy who, let's just say he could hum Hail to the Chief himself. He had presidential ambitions. Now he's got to go on national TV against America's nicest Docker dad, Tim Kaine, and defend Trump crazy. It'll be a long day at the office for Governor Mike Pence. On the other hand, that's how karma works. You make the deal with Trump and you pay the price. So I'm going to schedule some dental surgery during the vice presidential debate because I'll be fighting to stay awake. But it will be interesting. It will be worth watching, and you'll get my opinion about it on MSNBC and NBC afterward, as well as on the Twitter account. Still, I doubt anything will happen in that debate to move the race. The next big event is going to be the 9th when there's a town hall debate featuring, once again, Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. Now, Hillary, her strategy is pretty easy to figure out. I mean, you can hear her cackling right now, a noise that had best be employed in Guantanamo Bay to crack prisoners. But she's zipping around in the Scooby-Doo van all over the swing states, watching the polling creep back her way. She is happy. That will make her strong. In the next debate, she's tasted blood. She knows she can put Trump away with a second tremendous debate performance where Trump hurts himself and she does at least adequately. So she'll be in that town hall debate trying to break Trump's neck. Trump, on the other hand, will be desperate and flailing. This format, a town hall, where you have to interact with the little people, may not be Trump's best format. And the fact that he's going to be swinging hard and a little bit crazy, at least that's what it appears, could make for a very raucous and at least entertaining debate. Hopefully it won't cause a collapse in the currency as people lose faith in our entire system watching these two imperfect people try to murder each other on live television. I'll be there watching, and so will you, and we'll talk about it. Well, we have a great interview on this podcast, but first, let's do a little commerce.
Mike Murphy, podcasting sanity, Radio Free GOP.
So let's talk about the Private Equity Funcast. And it is a fun cast. It's a fun podcast. I think they invented that word. I'm talking about Jim Milbury and Devin Matthews. These guys are partners in a Chicago-based private equity firm. Now, Devin and Jim have spent the better part of the last 15 years buying and managing mid-market technology companies. The Funcast is something they created, and it draws from their collective experiences to pull back the veil on private equity, like we try to do with politics here at Radio Free GOP. These guys talk about everything, from the 7 deadly sins of private equity to the good, the bad, and the ugly of board meetings. So if you're the founder or owner of a business, if you work in management perhaps for a private equity-backed company, or you provide services to private equity as an investment banker, a lawyer, or an accountant, or like me, you just like to geek out on private equity and learn useful stuff, then you should subscribe to the Private Equity Funcast on iTunes or on Google Play. One more time, that's the Private Equity Funcast on iTunes or Google Play. Now, one reason I like the Funcast is I'm a believer in lifelong learning, which is why I'm also very excited about the Great Courses Plus video learning series. I mean, think about it. You're there at work, you're at the water cooler, and somebody starts talking about private equity because they listen to the Funcast and they know a lot. And you're thinking, I look like an idiot here. If only I could talk about ancient Roman architecture, or mathematics, or astronomy, or statistics, or better yet, history. I need something smart, and I need to say it soon. What are you going to do? You're out of luck. You look like an idiot. The day is ruined. Well, that's why I'm a big believer in the Great Courses Plus video learning series. This is a really good idea. These guys have been around a long time, and what they do is they go find some of the best college professors in the country teaching their most popular and insightful courses. And these professors are good performers. They really know what they're doing. They've done the course a million times. They know the material, and they're good at getting it across. So in the old days, you buy tapes. But now, because of video streaming technology, the Great Courses Plus, it's a streaming video product. In other words, you can watch it on your smartphone or on your laptop. You can watch all this stuff, and you can learn a tremendous amount from some of America's best college professors. They have over 600 courses. I finished the Professor Baum's course on Chinese history, and I'm in the middle of the Skeptic's Guide to American History, which is great because it has a little more context and a little more detail on some of the things we've all read that we kind of assume are true on a headline basis. You get the full story, which is fascinating with history and very important. So these courses are great, and as I said, they cover just about everything. And coolest of all, we have a really good offer for our Radio Free GOP listeners. They've opened the whole library. In other words, you can go on for free for a month and look at all the courses you want. It's kind of like binge watching your favorite show on streaming TV. So you can go in there and look at a bunch of courses. You can test it out. You can see what you think. I think you're really going to like it. I know I do. So here's how you can enjoy the Great Courses Plus. All you got to do is go online. To start your free month today, go to thegreatcoursesplus.com/RFG, like Radio Free G of Radio Free GOP. Again, that's thegreatcoursesplus.com/RFG and get your month's trial. You will enjoy it because learning is always interesting. Now, a quick word about our website. We have a new thing up at RadioFreeGOP.com. Our Orange Menace t-shirt comes in multiple colors. It is perfect for Halloween. Have a scary costume featuring the Orange Menace on the t-shirt growling at passersby. Get it in time for Election Day. Get it in time to show up for your favorite candidate rally. Get it in time to have a souvenir of the election. We also have our traditional t-shirt with the upside-down Republican logo in distress, as well as our cool little button on the website. You click it, it says Amazon on it, and when you buy something at Amazon, and I recommend a snowblower perhaps, we get a little taste. Our beak gets wet to help pay for the cost of producing the Radio Free GOP podcast. We also have a PayPal button where you can click and give us a few shekels if you wish. We're almost at break even now, so thank you for that. We'll take all the support you want to give, and we are always interested in your comments. All you got to do is email us at comment@radiofreegop.com. I read every single one, even the filthy stuff. So please comment away. We listen to you. We want to have a podcast that you enjoy and find informative. And again, for merch, for Amazon, for PayPal, all you got to do is go to radiofreegop.com. An extremely famous person just emailed me demanding an immediate Orange Menace t-shirt. You can join that elite club. Just go online. Okay, the commerce is done. Now, back to the podcast.
Fight for sanity. Sanity. In this crazy year. On Radio Free GOP.
My interview today is with a real legend in political consulting and in the Democratic Party. This is a warrior who has fought for the Democratic cause, unfortunately, from my point of view, for many, many decades. He is a great storyteller. He's been there for all the fights that counted. And if you know his real record, you'll know that he has helped the Democrats win all too many Senate, gubernatorial, and House races in places where it counted. I've been up against him, and it's hard. So, with no further ado, let me introduce my old friend, the Democratic legend himself, Bob Shrum.
It's time to ask some questions and go behind the scenes. Here's our latest interview. We'll try to keep it clean. Radio Free GOP.
We're here with Bob Shrum, a legend in political consulting. Bob, thank you for doing Radio Free GOP.
I'm glad to be here. Never be in the GOP, but glad to be on Radio Free GOP.
Let me start with the question I always start with. How did you get into this?
I always loved politics from the time I was a kid. I remember, and this will age me, saying to my parents, I want to skip school and listen to Douglas MacArthur's speech to Congress after Harry Truman fired him. And they let me do it. And I volunteered at the 1960 Democratic Convention, ended up working for Pierre Salinger. Things were much looser in those days than they are now. And actually, one of my jobs was to take distinguished visitors who arrived at the press office who were scheduled to go see Senator Kennedy up to a suite. And that's how I met him. So I loved it. And like so many people, I was profoundly influenced by him, by the 60s, by that whole period. And after I came out of law school, I was teaching at Boston College. And my friend Larry Tribe, who's one of the great constitutional scholars in the country, was then a young professor at Harvard, said, you can't do this for the rest of your life. You need to go out and have an impact. And I told him, I think I'd like to write speeches, which except for my speeches in college debate and things like that, I'd never written a speech. Anyway, he wrote a couple of letters, and the long and the short of it is that like 3 weeks later, I was Mayor Lindsay's speechwriter in New York City.
Your secret Republican past. Who would have thunk it?
Listen, he'd be the kind of Republican who'd get elected today.
Not in the primary, but in the national.
Yeah, he wouldn't get.
He'd be arrested in the primary.
He didn't. He was arrested in the '69 primary.
Right.
I mean, he didn't get the nomination. And
was that a Garth race?
Yeah.
'69.
Yeah. All of Lindsay's races were Garth races.
Did you deal with Garth at all in your Lindsay? Give me your Garth stories.
Very talented, could be very difficult, had a really tough temper, was one of the pioneers of the media consulting industry, along with, someone like Bob Squire, Charlie Guggenheim. On your side of the aisle, you have
Deardorff, Bailey, Ailes, Goodman, right?
Yeah. Bob Squire. I mean, people who really were the first generation of this.
I always kind of like Garth would do those. It was kind of the Ogilvy era of advertising. Those slow, the big boys have their candidate. We better get Mulligan. Those are the kind of interesting.
He had a slogan for Lindsay in '69. I wasn't there in '69. I came a year later, but he had a slogan for Lindsay in '69 that was fabulous. The second toughest job in America.
Needs the toughest.
Because number one, people could not imagine John Markey, the conservative senator from Staten Island, and they certainly couldn't imagine Mario Procaccino, who once went to a crowd in Harlem that was booing him and said, "My heart is as black as yours." Right. They just could not imagine him as if doing the second toughest job in America. And number two, it allowed him, and I think the mayor had to be talked into this from the stories I've heard. It allowed Garth to make an ad, and I don't know who had the original idea for the phrase, but it was wonderful because there'd been this huge snowstorm in the city. Queens hadn't gotten cleaned up. Lindsay was in terrible trouble, and they made an ad where he said, it was a mistake when the snow didn't get cleaned up in Queens. He didn't say, by the way, I made a mistake. He said it was a mistake.
The mistake was made. I think they had to make passive voice.
I think they had to do a lot of takes, but it allowed him to pivot and say, but it was no mistake when we hired 6,000 new police.
Right.
It was no mistake when we put all this extra money into education. So it was a very powerful spot. Garth understood that if Lindsay wanted to run for president, he had to switch parties over a cause. And I was a young speechwriter, and he and I agreed that the right time to do it was just before the 70 election, when Agnew was going around trashing everybody, and Lindsey just couldn't bring himself to do it. He switched the next summer, and then shortly after declared that he was running for president. It doesn't work very well that way.
Yeah, when you switch for your own ambition, not for, as you say, a cause.
And he did it. This was a guy, Lindsey was a guy who really had very strong beliefs, who was responsible, I think, for the fact that unlike most other major American cities, New York never burned in the 60s, who felt very strongly about the war in Vietnam. He just didn't fit the Republican Party of that era, although that Republican Party of that era, if you look at, say, Nixon's domestic policies, today, he'd be burned in a primary.
No,
They'd
people
throw him
forget
out.
domestically Nixon was a liberal. Nixon would actually get primary trouble. Nobody ever believes this day from the right, Ashcroft and all that. So it's exactly right. It's a very different era now. I've got to ask you one other callback to these early days in your career. What was Salinger like?
I was a kid. I was 16 years old. He was funny. I knew him later on, too. He was funny. He was no nonsense. He was nice to me, and I enjoyed it. It was an amazingly lucky thing at 16 to be able to get that kind of close-up look at what was happening with a candidate who was your hero. And today it could never happen.
Yeah,
you never get the vetting. There'd be Secret Service vetting. There'd all this stuff. It just
the
couldn't
campaign
happen.
world is still fairly porous for young kids, but not in the presidential world.
Yeah,
it is a hard thing to crack, and it's kind of a culture of keeping people out, not bringing them in. So, post Lindsey, what happens next?
Well, I work for President Muskie, who, of course,
right?
Yeah.
And we're going to have Mark Shields on the podcast. He tells some funny Muskie stories.
Well, he's a perfect example of the Peter principle in politics. He was, like, in 1968, the best vice presidential nominee imaginable, and in 1972 was a terrible presidential candidate. He had a bad temper. He couldn't decide on where exactly he was on the Vietnam War, although when I went to work for him, I thought he was against it, and he was kind of against it. But I got very lucky because he gave, sort of in the dying phase of the campaign, a speech in Pennsylvania that I wrote on television about the Vietnam War. And I remember, I don't know if I'm quoting it exactly, but there were some lines in it. The Bible asks us, which of us, if his son asked for bread, would give him a stone. Our sons have asked for life, and we have sent them to an Asian jungle. Our sons have asked for an education, and we have taught them how to kill. And after he suspended his campaign, and they asked me if I wanted to stay, and I said no, but I didn't know what I was going to do. I got a call from Frank Mankiewicz, who said, "Did you write that speech in Pennsylvania?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, George McGovern wants to hire you." And the long and the short of it is that George McGovern became one of my best friends for all his life, and you had to be realistic about that campaign, especially from the Eagleton affair on.
Right.
I always believed that if it hadn't been for Eagleton, and if we had given the acceptance speech, or he had given the acceptance speech at like 10 o'clock at night instead of 3 in the morning, which is prime time in Guam, that he would have carried 8 or 10 states, maybe gotten 45%, 46% of the vote, which in those days would not have been unrespectable, and he would have been viable for the future. But once his vice presidential choice, Tom Eagleton, once that whole thing blew up.
Yeah, that was bad.
Yeah.
And people, you have to be a real political junkie, know the history, but Eagleton kind of went down fighting. He didn't really take the bullet, so it became a big, endless thing.
He wanted some time to go out there and prove himself.
Right.
And, as he was out there proving himself, it just got worse and worse. Mankiewicz, who had actually talked to him on the phone at the convention, and I was standing in the back of the room, had said to him, "Is there anything in your background that would be a problem?" And I have a very close friend who was a close friend of his, always a close friend of his, who had left Miami with the belief that Eagleton was just going to turn down the vice presidency because this could be a big problem.
Sure. Yeah.
And he was somewhere else and heard it and got in a plane and was stunned that Eagleton accepted. Because his answer to the question, "Is there anything in your background that could be a problem?" was no. But you have to understand, vice presidential vetting is a comparatively new thing, and we're always trying to catch up with the last problem. For example, if you were going to, again, pick a governor of a small state who's not terribly well known nationally, part of the vetting would probably be a foreign policy basic quiz to see if you knew what you were talking about. The financial vetting was not nearly as heavy until after Geraldine Ferraro in 1984. You know, she was a good friend, and they hadn't done anything wrong, but it became a big mess. And in 1952, Eisenhower actually thought the convention picked the vice presidential candidate, and Arthur Bonnell had to tell him, no, you pick. And, well, who do we pick? Well, we picked this guy Nixon.
Yeah, it's changed more than people think. And now it's all hyper vetting. I mean, with Palin, I think a lot of what happened was the McCain campaign, I worked on the first one. And, you know, it was no secret that part of our base almost was the media in that campaign. They were a lot tougher on McCain the second time. And I think the McCain folks, I wasn't around, but kind of my reading of the tea leaves is they didn't want to vet her to the degree that it would leak out. They loved the idea of kind of springing on the convention, the big surprise, but that is very risky business because there's no way to vet somebody, particularly in a small state capital, without everybody knowing you're vetting them. But if you can't ask everybody who's worked with them, there's never going to be a real vet. And A.B. Culverhouse, I mean, he was in an impossible position with her.
Yeah, but I think what they needed was for, Mark Salter to vet her, to sit her down and have a conversation with her about foreign policy. He would have discovered in 5 minutes that she was an inconceivable candidate.
Yeah.
But I have some sympathy for McCain in that situation. He was heading for defeat. They wanted to throw some kind of Hail Mary pass. I believe he actually wanted to run with Joe Lieberman. And
Lieberman was probably his first choice, I believe, or Tom Ridge. I mean,
I think it's Lieberman or Ridge, but they're both pro-choice.
Right.
And I think he was told, there'll be a huge fight on the convention floor and you might lose it.
Which was a gamble worth taking because it could have restarted the old McCain image, which was the only chance he had to win.
Yeah, I think doing something like that would have changed the dynamic of the race. They tried to change it with Sarah Palin. As I say, I have sympathy for what they did. It just turned out to be a disaster. Some gambles, you take them and it's either going to be, I'm going to run the table or I'm going to end up under the table.
But there are gambles for the sake of gambling and calculated gambles. The problem with Palin was she was never going to be accretive to the ticket. You don't care about Alaska, and she was a base Paul that doesn't get him anything else. It was just not. I think they were sitting there watching the coverage of the Obama convention, and people forget, but the conventional wisdom media, the one telling us that Trump is surging for a lot of the last 6 weeks, at the time was saying, the women are never going to vote for Obama because they're mad over Hillary. And that led to the dumb idea, well, if we get a woman, we're going to win. And
I thought that was
silly.
That was always preposterous.
Yeah. But remember how loud it was at the convention and the coverage?
But that's like the crazy theory this year that the Sanders people are, for the most part, not going to vote.
Democratic primary voters aren't going to show up in a Joe election. You're post-Lindsay. You're going forward into Democratic politics. You're writing speeches. How do you get into the consulting business?
Well, I ran the Senate. I was the chief counsel and staff director of the Senate Committee on Nutrition and Human Needs after being a Kennedy Fellow at Harvard after the 72 campaign. And I was kind of intrigued with this guy, Jimmy Carter. And I was intrigued with him in part as a rebellion against some of my friends who would say, guy's a Southern Baptist, he's not our kind of guy. And Mark Shields and I both had that reaction. So I went to work for him. He asked me several times. I finally did it.
What time was this in the cycle?
Just before, April, just before the Pennsylvania primary.
So he was alive and kicking.
He was alive and kicking.
He did his rocket fuel.
Anyway, I was there 10 days and I quit the night of the Pennsylvania primary.
What happened?
I left him, I don't talk about a lot. I left him a letter, which has been printed in all the books, so I'll just quote it, which says, I'm not sure what you believe in other than yourself. And I think Jimmy Carter has been a very good ex-president. I don't think he was a good president.
We have bipartisan agreement on that point.
He reminds me of a line from Tacitus about a Roman emperor. All would have thought him fit to rule if he never had. And as I went to work for a magazine called New Times. We had some great people there, Frank Rich, Janet Maslin, John Larson was the editor, just fabulous people. Tony Schwartz, who's now torturing Trump all the time and wrote The Art of the Deal, actually edited a section of the magazine called The Insider, which had all these short takes. And about 4 or 5 days before Ted Kennedy announced for president in 1980, I got hired.
In the 10 days where you were with Carter, did you spend a fair amount of time with him?
Yes.
And that it was his decision-making process.
I spent the whole 10 days with him.
And that was all you wanted?
I didn't. He was, look, he's older now. He's done some incredible good things, although I think he's annoyed presidents at times by interfering with foreign policy. And I just, at that time, and I don't regret it, didn't think he was the right choice for the Democratic Party or the right choice for the country. It was the only time I ever voted Republican. I voted for Gerald Ford.
Oh my goodness, we'd made a little news there, probably. No, it's it's always struck me that
I don't see how you can possibly say this is what I don't get about some of these Republicans who are for Trump. If you say that you don't think somebody's up to the job and you're not sure what they believe in other than themselves, how can you vote for them?
Right. No, look, believe me, I'm out here in the Republican resistance loud and clear, and I'm a little ashamed that not more people are. I'll tell you this, I believe that if there was an election held only of the Republican Senate caucus, if we knew all their ballots on Election Day, Trump wouldn't carry them, or the Republican Congress.
I'll go a step further. I believe that a number of members of the Senate caucus and even some of the House caucus, once those curtains close, are actually going to vote for Hillary Clinton.
Okay, so let's get to the big event of 1980, it's fairly rare. Ted Kennedy, a huge force in the Democratic Party, primaries President Carter, and you were in the middle of that.
Yes, and got to know him very well, and in fact, worked for him from then until he died in one way or another. And the beginning of that campaign, in my view, was a mess because we were so far ahead that the classic temptation in politics when you're way ahead is to not offend anybody. And Ted Kennedy was the worst politician I ever met in my life at saying nothing. Because if he was saying nothing, he knew it, he conveyed it to his audiences.
Yeah.
And then we also were hurt tremendously by the hostage crisis, which would damage Carter badly in the fall, but it saved him in the primaries because he could say, I can't campaign, I can't debate, I have to spend all my time in the White House trying to free the hostages. I mean, those were the two things I think that made it so difficult at what had looked like a relatively easy race. But then Kennedy lost Iowa, and we had an internal debate about whether we were going to go on or not. And there was a vote among a group of us sitting around in the office, and it was a tie vote, and he said, well, I don't care how you vote, I'm going on. And by the way, I'm going to say what I want to say from now on. And he gave a speech at Georgetown that laid out a predicate that should have been the announcement speech.
Right, sure.
And
you see this once in a while where a campaign gets up on its feet with a bunch of kind of public expectations, gets defeated somehow, and then discovers itself, but a little too late.
Well, and then as we, he won the New York primary. Right. It was a huge upset. Won the Connecticut primary, won Pennsylvania. And I think it was the morning of the Wisconsin primary, the president appeared on the morning shows and said, we're about to have the hostages released, which of course did not happen.
Right.
But
he grabbed the spotlight and Bigfooted everything.
Right. And then just before the Michigan caucuses, which I think we won anyway, was the rescue mission that failed.
Right.
And at that point, Carter could no longer hide in the White House. He had to, it was beginning to hurt him. And Kennedy won a lot of stuff at the end: California, New Jersey, New Mexico.
Which is why it went to the convention. It was close enough.
It wasn't that,
it wasn't that close in delegates, but in momentum psychology.
He had a moral claim to go to the
He
had a moral claim to go to the convention. But winning at the end doesn't help you in a Democratic primary system where there's proportional representation the whole way, because once you get behind, you can't catch up.
But am I wrong that the perception was that there was this huge late surge for Kennedy?
No, I think
based on California.
There was a late surge for Kennedy, and he had the instinct to compete in Ohio, which We had some polling data that said we shouldn't. We lost it by a little wee bit. We should have competed there. If he had won Ohio as well as California and New Jersey, I don't know what would have happened, because I think people in the party would have said, wait a minute.
And for my political junkie listeners, who were the we in the room? Who were those folks in the room after Iowa? Who was the Kennedy squad back then?
Well, let's see. Steve Smith, Larry Horowitz, Kerry Parker, Carl Wagner.
Gotcha.
I'm sure I'm leaving people out.
Yeah, but I'm just curious who the contemporaries
but I remember it was 4-4. And, of course, I was strongly for going on.
Right.
Because I thought that if he ran when it looked easy and he dropped out when it looked hard, that was a really damning judgment.
A stain that would carry for a long time.
Yeah, and he didn't need me to persuade him or anything. He knew what he wanted to do, and he knew he wanted to go out there and say what he actually believed and what he thought. And went to the convention. There was a rule that said delegates had to vote for the person they were elected to vote for, with no in good conscience escape clause. We named it the robot rule and challenged it. It's actually an indefensible rule if you don't have a conscience clause, because something could happen that would mean you shouldn't vote for the person. Superdelegates are the poison pill the Democratic Party has never swallowed. Were they to overturn the verdict of the voters in the primaries, I think that the nominee would have very little chance of winning. I think it would be a complete rebellion.
But it does create, I think it did at least this year anyway, it creates a sense of security for a front runner when they stumble that does affect the psychology of the race. See, I think if there weren't superdelegates, Bernie might have done better.
Well, the other way you could argue that is, what if Bernie had won Iowa?
Yeah.
Which he almost did, and then he won New Hampshire.
Right, and run the table the old-fashioned way.
And then he managed to win one southern state.
Yeah.
At that point, he might have had momentum that would
I
have been
think
very
he
difficult
totally would have. But if that
stop.
hadn't happened, when he had his surges, there was always this kind of story that, but she is a superdelegate, so he'll never be able to catch her.
Look, this argument, people had this argument in 2008, saying, and I think she made it at one point, that Obama didn't really have the nomination because the superdelegates could vote for whoever they wanted. And a lot of them were pledged to her. And as he started winning and winning and winning, they got unpledged.
They melted away, yeah.
Yes, and they melted
Oldest
away.
rule of politics, be for what's going to happen.
Well, and also I think, I go back to it again, I don't think you can have, in the modern era, party bosses or party elites overturn the will of the voters. I think the defect in the Republican process this year was there were 17 of these people.
Yeah.
And he could win fundamentally with a minority of the vote.
That's true, and an organic, real grievance wave that needed to find a vessel to fill.
Well,
because my big worry wasn't so much Trump, early anyway, it was Cruz, because Cruz could have very well been the grievance candidate if it hadn't been Trump. And either way, that the market tends to find what it's looking for, unfortunately.
I think the Republican Party made a bargain with the grievance constituency, the Tea Party and other elements, in 2010 and 2014, and managed to get the House and the Senate back, ignoring a warning in JFK's inaugural address that those who ride on the back of the tiger often end up inside. And that's what happened here.
I think there's a lot of truth in that, but I think there's a symmetry to it, because Occupy Wall Street and the grievance politics of the left brought Bernie to life in a way that I think it stunned a lot of observers.
But Bernie's supporters, most Bernie supporters have not had a great deal of trouble going over to Clinton. The biggest problem she has is with millennials, and I think she might have had that problem anyway, whether Bernie had run or not. But she's got four huge allies in dealing with millennials, and I think some of the focus groups last week and dial groups during the debate, these millennials are moving toward her.
Yeah, no, I think she is more generically acceptable to Democrats who are dying to vote Democrat anyway than Trump is, because Trump is such an outlier of craziness. But before we get to Trump,
I just have to say one thing. Yeah, Trump is her big ally in getting these millennials.
Oh, no, Trump is the gift to her. The SNL sketch I'm waiting for is when Trump is on the phone saying, what else do I have to do? I've done the crazy Latino thing. I've done the Muslim bigotry. I've insulted you at debates. Lady, I'm trying to help here. What else do you want me to do? Like it was their plan all along, because it's like he's working for her. But anyway, I want to get you into political consulting, because that's where I really know you.
So anyway, after the convention, and I went around the country in the fall with Kennedy as we campaigned for Carter. We had one event at a Union Hall with several thousand people where he said, I want you to give the same support this fall to Jimmy Carter and Walter Mondale that you gave me in the spring. No one applauded. And he said, I'm going to say it again, and you're going to stand and cheer. Yeah. And a reporter standing next to me turned to me and said, this election's over. And those were the Reagan Democrats. They liked Kennedy. They liked Reagan. They didn't like Carter.
Was Carter ever grateful for that? I have a feeling the two guys didn't like each other very much. I know Carter didn't like Kennedy.
Kennedy never held grudges. I mean, there might have been a couple of people, but he generally did not hold grudges.
Carter, on the other hand, all saints.
I think Carter. It's easier for Carter to think he lost because of Kennedy than because of the economy, the hostages, and Ronald Reagan.
Yeah, they always find a misfunctioning microphone or something to blame. It's just the nature of politics.
So I was press secretary he asked me to be his press secretary, and I continued to write speeches. And at the end of 1984, I had been writing some scripts for Bob Squire, who was a Democratic media consultant.
Sure, I knew him. I liked him a lot.
I get like $100, and he was a great friend, although going into the business, I would have been happy to stay friends. He wasn't particularly happy. And I talked with Pat Cadell, who had been Carter's pollster, and with David Doak, and we went into business.
Doak came out of Virginia, right?
Doak is from Missouri originally.
Missouri, but he had worked in Virginia politics.
No, he worked in Virginia politics for Chuck Robb, and he worked in Texas for Mark White.
Got it. Okay.
And of course, the knock on and Doak and I went off on our own after 11
because you all started
months.
Together, right?
We started together, right. but
and Pat's a volatile personality.
We couldn't. I'm not going to go down that road. It was just not. You just couldn't. It just couldn't be made to work.
Yeah.
But the knock on us was that we never made ads before, or that we didn't know how to run a camera. And I always thought that was silly. You could hire a great cameraman and you could tell him what you wanted.
There was a little bit of an auteur thing back then because Squire had come out of public television, Charlie Guggenheim, the great filmmaker. And so being political people doing political messaging without a film background might have seemed kind of different. Now, on the Republican side, Ailes had always been kind of a TV guy, Mike Douglas and beyond. Bobby Goodman had been a jingle writer and an ad man in Baltimore, and Bailey and Deardorff were campaign foreign policy guys. So you weren't the only ones breaking the mold.
We came out of politics, and I think we were some of the early people who were breaking the mold. And we were lucky that year because we had Alan Cranston's campaign.
This is what, 86?
86.
Yeah, that was a great
year.
Alan
Cranston's campaign, very, very tough re-election to the Senate. It was pretty clear from all the research that we were not going to win this by telling people all the good things he'd done for California. It was 2 years after he'd run for president, dyed his hair orange and moved decidedly to the left. And he was a terrific person, by the way, a great person to work for.
What is it about running for president and orange hair?
I don't know. We were running against a guy named Ed Shaw.
I remember the ad, Shaw.
That was his...
Bobby Goodman, I think, too.
Yeah, and we started the day after the primary while he was in Hawaii on a week vacation having won the primary, started going after him on flip-flopping. And we did not stop all the way until the election. Even had an ad at the end that was like a K-Tel Records ad.
The greatest hit spot, yeah, I remember it.
And Alan won narrowly. We had a candidate in Pennsylvania named Bob Casey, who'd run for governor 3 times before and had actually lost once because somebody with the same name, Bob Casey, put his name on the ballot. People didn't know how to vote for the one they liked. Sure. And he had been derided as a 3-time loss from Holy Cross. He was running against Ed Rendell.
Hey, what is it about Pennsylvania? Remember John Heinz, thick, rich, and red, just like the ketchup. It's the state of the clever insult.
And but he got the last laugh because he beat Rendell in the primary and he narrowly beat Scranton in the general. And then something I was very proud of being involved in was Barbara Mikulski, who was the first Democratic woman ever elected to the Senate on her own, and who proved to be one of the greatest natural people with a camera I have ever seen. We had a shoot plan, and scripts and all that stuff, and we got rained out. And so we're going to have to reschedule it for the next day. And she said, come on, let's go to the Lexington Market, one of these big open markets in Baltimore. We're walking through. Everybody knew her. She had incredibly charming conversations with everybody who came up to her. They all liked her. And I said, we're scrapping the first half of the shoot tomorrow, and we're going to bring a camera, and we're coming right back to this place.
Yeah, follow around.
And I mean, we ended up with a spot where the lady who must have been, 70 and a little heavy, comes up to her and says, "Jeepers, dear, you've lost weight." And Mikulski, without missing a beat, said, "I'm counting my calories, counting my blessings, and counting my votes." And then, she's ours and she cares about our issues. And then there's a guy, she goes up to a guy at the fish counter and she claims she's 5'2". I think she's more like 4'9". But she comes right up to the edge of the fish counter and she looks at him and poking her hand over and she said, "We're trying to save the bay so we can save the fish, so we can save your business." And he says, "Ain't nobody going to beat you." Now, you can't, can't script that.
Spontaneous moment. And people actually liking a politician.
Yeah. She is a cultural phenomenon in Maryland. If she had decided to run for re-election this year, she could have done it without running a single spot.
Oh, yeah. No, we barely would ever try to run against her. Every once in a while, you have somebody
first time
locked in.
First time was hard. First time we had a primary against the incumbent governor and a congressman named Mike Barnes from Montgomery County. Mm-hmm. And we raised the least money of any of the three candidates in the primary.
Barnes was kind of the candidate with that everybody thought would soar because he was in the D.C. media market.
Yeah, and the Washington
so the press
Post
all
liked
loved him. Yeah.
And but it was really kind of the beginning of Emily's List too, because Emily's List, which has supplied so much money to so many pro-choice Democratic women, Barbara was their first big cause.
Now, when you were doing those statewide, did you and Doak each do a couple on your own, or did you work together on everything?
We worked together.
Yeah, it was a team deal.
We worked together. I mean, as you know, because you've been in the business, these things can fray after a while, and I have a lot of respect for David. We frayed, ultimately, and after 1994, when we had a really terrific year, actually, because Kennedy beat Romney, Paul Sarbanes got reelected in Maryland in a race people didn't think he was going to. Chuck Robb got reelected. I mean, a lot of good stuff happened while Democrats were losing all over the country. But we split up after that. And then
it happens. I mean, it was interesting. Alex Castellanos and I were together starting in 86. And after a while, you just kind of want to spread your wings and do it your own way. But we decided we were so close that we really wanted to have the first amicable split ever. So we moved kind of quickly to do it. Yeah. Before the fraying got too bad. We're close to this day.
Totally amicable, but it got resolved over time.
Right, exactly. But it's natural.
But the people I was partners then with Tad Devine, who did the Sanders campaign this year.
Who made the best primary spot, I believe, of this year.
I think
for
the
Bernie.
best political spot of this year.
Yeah, no,
it has not one word in it.
Yeah,
it has a song. It's an empowerment ad. It's telling people you have the power. But with him and with Mike Donilon, he's very close to Vice President Biden, one of the quietest and smartest people I know.
Yeah.
And then in the late 90s and early 2000s, Carter Eskew was part of that.
Oh, I didn't know Carter was with you guys.
Oh, yeah.
And he's gone off to a big career in the corporate world.
Right.
You had a good run. Let me ask you a question, though. What race of the one that you haven't mentioned yet are you proudest of, and what is a loss that still bugs you to this day?
Wow. I'll give you a loss that bugs me to this day, not because it was unexpected. Bill Nelson, who was a congressman from Florida, set out to run for governor in 1990. And there was no one running against him. And suddenly Lawton Chiles, the former senator, decided that he was going to run. And I got a call, got in a plane, went down to Jacksonville or wherever Bill was that day. And I said, look, I think you ought to just go back and run for your congressional seat. And he said, I don't want to do that. I want to stay in the race. Will you stay with me? And I say, sure. And so on primary night, we lose like 70-30. And then he calls me in 1994 and he said, you probably don't do insurance and fire commissioner races, but I'm going to run for insurance and fire commissioner in Florida, and I'd like you to do the race. And I said, you know what, it would be a privilege.
Did you ask him if he was against fire and for insurance, just to check going in?
It is interesting that they have that's the job.
Yeah, it's a big job, actually.
And so he won, got reelected, did both races, and then The day that was Connie Mack, I think, announced he wasn't going to run for re-election to the Senate, we were on the phone with Bill, and he walked out of his office in 10 minutes and announced he was running. And, of course, he's still there. The whole situation rankled. But look, every loss, I don't know, and I'm not going to say who they are. I worked for a couple of people that in the end I didn't like.
Yeah.
They probably didn't like me.
Yep. I've been there too.
But most of the people I worked for were really decent, really cared, had values, were in politics. Everybody has an ego, but they were in politics for the right reason. And so every loss hurts. And, that's...
Yeah. Most politicians are much better than people think they are. And those of us who've been in the room where the tough decisions are made, where they put, their guts on the line, not always, but most of the time, people would be prouder of them than they are of the caricature of politicians.
But we're part of, I don't do this anymore. I haven't done this in 10 years. I'm teaching at the University of Southern California and occasionally running my mouth on television instead of running campaigns. I think that the consulting industry is part of the problem because it's too easy to make an ad or write a speech saying those Washington insiders and tying everybody who serves in Washington.
No, that's a good point.
That.
We have been attacking our own category for a long time, and look what happens.
Yeah,
there's some truth to that. We'll be back with Bob Shrum in a minute, but now I have to pay some bills. Okay, smart people know that when you think about food, first you think about ingredients because fresh, high-quality ingredients are the key to making a good meal. And Blue Apron is all about high-quality, fresh ingredients. They source them from all the best places, often from family-run farms, fisheries, and ranchers, all the suppliers that give you the kind of food you want. So here's how Blue Apron works, and I speak from experience because I have been able to take my limited, let's just politely say, cooking skills and apply it to their product and make 2 really good meals. So they send you these fresh ingredients in pre-portioned amounts with simple, easy-to-understand cooking instructions. So in under 40 minutes, you can create a really good home-cooked meal. And again, you don't need to be Chef Paul to pull it off. I've done it, and I'm a clown in the kitchen. So it's less than $10 per meal, so the economics of it are pretty good. And the recipes are seasonal, so you can kind of calibrate what you're eating to the time of year, which really makes for a good eating experience. They're delicious, they're home-cooked, and they have tremendous variety to them. So here's something people don't always know about Blue Apron. They do not repeat the recipes. Over an entire year, you will never have the same meal twice. Now, if you really like a meal, and I really liked one of the pasta meals they sent me, you keep the recipe card and you have the flexibility then to make it as many times as you want. So you basically get a fantastic variety of food and the ability to replicate your favorite dish whenever you feel like it. Now there's tremendous flexibility to this all the way across because you customize your recipes each week based on your performance. You're in charge. You choose delivery options to fit your needs, so there's no weekly commitment. You only get deliveries when you want them. And again, it's easy. You can do it in under 40 minutes, and it is all about fresh ingredients. So here's what I recommend you do. Check out this week's menu and get your first 3 meals free with free shipping by going to blueapron.com/RFGOP. One more time, that's blueapron.com/RFGOP. You will love how good it feels and tastes to create your own home-cooked meals with the best possible Blue Apron ingredients. So don't wait, give it a try. blueapron.com/RFGOP. Blue Apron is a better way to cook. And in the kitchen of argument and ideas, you can't beat Ricochet.com. How's that for an awkward transition? Radio Free GOP is also brought to you by the cheapskates but good folks at Ricochet.com, the smartest and most civil center-right community on the web. They have no trolls. That's a relief, huh? No trolls at all, they guarantee it. So become a member, let your voice be heard, and listen to great podcasts. I think they put out like 10. They're all great. They distribute us as well. You can get it all for just $5 a month. But wait, if you're a Radio Free GOP listener, you get a free trial. Your first month is free. So all you got to do is go to ricochet.com/join. That's ricochet.com/join and sign up today. All right, with that, the commerce is now complete. I barely do it now. I don't do candidate campaigns anymore. And I do believe and this sounds like an old fart thing to say, but I've been around since the mid-'80s too. The older culture of campaigns was not as stupid as it is. There was more strategy, I think. And it wasn't such a brute force weapon of just megatonnage. The campaigns were a little more elegant then, and it gave the politicians, those campaigns gave the politicians a little more room to do the right thing than the 1914 meat grinder we have now.
Well, I think what's happened is so much of the advertising, for example, and we could talk about how relevant the advertising still is. I think it is, especially in these statewide
Yeah, it's the new cliche is advertising. TV doesn't mean anything, which is why we have a improbable TV star as the Republican nominee. That's how relevant television is.
And which is why Barack Obama spent like $650 million or whatever on it in 2012.
Right. When I stop seeing Toyota ads on TV, I'll know that TV doesn't work.
But I think there's so much of a cookie cutter approach now. Let's just take all the bad stuff we know, dump it on people's heads. I think there's way too little effort to create the kind of positive ad that can
totally
inspire
agree.
people. You mentioned Tad Devine's ad for Bernie Sanders. That's a classic. There ought to be more of those.
What we forget is nothing is harder to do, but nothing works better than a positive ad that rings true and authentic, and hopefully has a little creativity to it so it pops off the screen.
And even negative ads, instead of the announcer, and then they did this, and they did this, and they did this, and he did this bad thing. In 1994, in that Kennedy-Romney race, when we found these workers in Indiana who had been laid off or had their health insurance taken away, when Romney's enterprise took over the company, we just turned a camera on them. I mean, I'd written a script in case they couldn't talk. And Tad went out to film him, and we had a plan. He was going to call me, and he called me and said, these people don't need a script.
Yeah.
And
no,
those ads were
authenticity
incredibly powerful.
is always the key to this stuff. The problem now, I think, is digital production is great because it's quick and fast and cheap, but it makes people lazy. And you get these grab bag spots where they just pump out a lot of crap. And what people forget is the creative looks the same everywhere. So people are seeing the same archetype of a spot, and they put a big filter up. And I don't care if it's digital or television. I mean, I'm a big believer in digital media, but we basically run the same bad content there that we do in the paid television. And it is not nearly as effective as good advertising could be. But good advertising is hard to do, takes time, and it's expensive. And campaigns are incentivized to have this kind of immediate need for get a spot up right now, poll immediately. They kind of hide behind the tactics of analytics to think in 48 hours they really know what's going on. It's more complicated than that. It's storytelling, which takes a certain pace and time.
That was the other thing. Narrative is getting lost.
Totally lost.
And in fact, one of the things that struck me in the first presidential debate, and I was a little surprised by it to some extent, I guess being a little surprised to some extent means the same thing, was how good Hillary Clinton was at narrative. And basically, here's a proposal, tell a story about it, here's why we want to do it. Donald Trump has not the slightest gift for narrative. He can be in the middle of an answer about almost anything, and he'll throw in the word Yemen, thinking he's just said something. And he hasn't said anything but the word, and he hasn't explained to people what it means.
Yeah, no, he has these chunks that he throws out, which is the immigration chunk, the trade, everything's going to hell. I call it the Gotham City chunk. The city's on fire, we need a bat. And he will, when he feels the crowd getting cold, he'll just throw a chunk at him to get that immediate reaction from the crowd, and then he'll ramble on. He reminds me more than anything else of some of the more unpleasant finance people. I don't mean finance staff, I mean big donors. You've been here, every campaign once in a while they wheel guys like us out to talk to the donors. And there's always, I call him the Scrapco guy, as kind of an homage to an old Second City TV sketch. There's always the Scrapco guy in back who's like, let me tell you the way it works. TV ads don't, and on they go. And they repeat what's been on cable TV that week. Trump is that guy. He's the Scrapco guy.
But he also hyperlinks. There's no coherence. Yes. So, he could get asked a question, say he was at Mar-a-Lago, about Israel. And he would say, Israel, very important ally. Now, I want to say, we're standing here at Mar-a-Lago, and we have a great ballroom. And we rent it for bar mitzvahs because, and he actually said something like this, we love the Jews, we love the Jews. Then there's Iran, worst deal in history. And North Korea, how did that happen?
Yeah.
And you have no idea what the argument is.
Well, there is no argument. It's just a raw wire of emotion and resentment zapping around with like cable TV chatter facts that aren't even really facts. There's no depth on any issue.
It's campaigned by id.
Yeah, totally. And there's no campaign. It's a banana republic with some advanced guys and this so-called campaign staff that I think barely talked to Trump. I hate conventional wisdom punditry, and there's a lot of it. And I just think there's an incentive to keep saying, oh, Trump's surging, Trump can win, to create the daily oomph of watching cable TV news. Everything is the Hindenburg explosion. Every poll is the most important poll ever. To me,
breaking news.
Everything is breaking news. It's kind of like antibiotics. We're not going to have breaking news anymore. We're going to wear it all out on nothing. But fundamentally, I have thought from the math, the fundamental math of the election, that Trump has been stuck from day one. And as bad as she is, she looks weak and the ballot numbers close a little in the low 40s, but then gravity takes over. He is Trump, which means he does crazy things, particularly when he's under pressure like now, he gets crazier. And then she goes back to her 4-point lead. So am I wrong? Can Donald Trump win this election?
I don't think so. And I've said it publicly before. Look, there could be some unpredictable event that somehow or other enables him to win. But people used to think it would be terrorism. But we've now been through a couple terrorist incidences where he can't help but congratulate himself.
Right.
Because he predicted them.
He's the hero of every story he tells.
And where he now seems so unstable and impulsive that people, I think, trust him less and less in that kind of situation. And, he used to have a big lead on combating terrorism. In the Fox News poll, she actually leads on combating terrorism. So there could be an event I can't describe. Roger Stone is threatening some big WikiLeaks thing that's going to come out. That's sort of, I guess, the Russian stooges.
I think we just had the first one with the tax bomb. Some third-level accountant finally stopped yelling at the TV and sent a couple pages to New York Times. Now we find out the guy, the wonder you can't get the taxes out of him with a crowbar. It's what we all kind of assume. There's something horrible in it. The horrible thing is he had so many losses, he probably hasn't paid taxes for 20 years.
But he didn't have a loss. He used this loophole.
Other people's money, right.
Loophole
Yeah.
where you if you're an S corporation, and it loses money, you can take that onto your personal income taxes. Now, he didn't lose the money. The banks lost the money ultimately, and the bondholders lost the money when the whole enterprise went crashing down into bankruptcy.
He lost,
so he gets credit for
he lost his float. He would have paid taxes had it gone the other way.
Right.
But he had a leveraged tax loophole that's pretty amazing, and it gives him a get out of tax card for a long, long time.
Yeah, it could be 18 years.
Which is why, obviously, none of this is like the most obvious mystery in the world now solved. But it's still bad, and I think the bigger impact of it, and I think it's a big thing because it reinforces everything people suspect about Trump's dishonesty and all that, is whenever Trump is under pressure, losing the debate, the idiotic fight with Miss Universe, and now this, he reacts to that by going crazy in real time in front of an adoring crowd. So I think this week is going to be a total meltdown day after day after day, going very Breitbart, very Vince Foster, very Trump unhinged.
My guess is that he did listen a little bit before the last debate, and he went in and for the first 20 minutes or so, he was trying to be the acceptable Trump.
Yeah, then the pills wore off.
The pills wore off, and she threw out the line about a $14 million loan from
your
his father.
dad, yeah.
And the top blew off his head.
Yeah.
And I think his lesson is that he's just going to let Trump be Trump. And that's the best way to win. And if he doesn't win, it doesn't matter.
He's going to close on his own terms, which is Steve Bannon whispering crazy into his ear. I think
today he imitated Hillary Clinton falling. He was at a rally, and he imitated when she fell on 9/11.
Yeah. No. And he is talking about making sure you go into certain neighborhoods, if you know what I mean. And he is going to go to pure Trump now, which is pure crazy. And I think in hindsight, the new logo of the Trump campaign should be Trump's face with an enormous fishhook in it. Because have you ever seen a candidate in American politics take the bait the way this guy does?
No.
It's like he has a button on his forehead. It's just unbelievable.
I thought she was very clever because she embedded that bait inside an argument about who was going to fight for the middle class that was pretty well constructed. And instead of ignoring it and just talking about the argument, he took off on, that was a small loan. Well, you can't tell people that a $14 million loan was a small loan. They don't live in that universe.
Here's a totally speculative question. We have no facts here, but I'm curious what you think. It has been my experience sometimes that when people send stuff to the newspaper in an envelope, they also send it to the other campaign. So I wonder if when she did her routine on his taxes, which was very well constructed, well, maybe he doesn't have the money we thought he did. Maybe they're Russian banks. Maybe he hasn't paid taxes in a lot. They knew that document was floating around inside the New York Times being vetted.
I think that reading the Times, that arrived on September 23rd. And if it had arrived in the Clinton campaign at the same time, and I have no reason to believe it did, there wouldn't have been time to vet it. It took the Times all this.
Oh, yeah, no, but enough to tee up the issue a little.
But you would do it anyway.
Yeah.
Because it makes, first of all, there's been a lot of evidence that he has Russian investors. So that's an easy.
Yeah, no bank in New York allegedly will touch him.
There's a lot of evidence that he doesn't actually give money to charity, and the Trump Foundation money is spent on ridiculous things, including political contributions. And there's a grave suspicion that he doesn't pay any taxes.
Right.
Look, if he had paid taxes, if he had given to charity, and if they wouldn't show that he was in hock to all, to Russian banks, he certainly would have released the return. So I think that it was an obvious line of attack for her. He was not prepared for it. He had that old thing about I'm under audit, and
he had his old chestnut, and
you're allowed to release it under audit.
I just wouldn't be surprised if they knew too. But
here's what I think happened. I think it's possible that some employee in Trump Tower or in an accounting firm that deals with Trump who has been badly abused over time just Xerox those 3 pages, put them in an envelope, and put a Trump Tower return address on it. My guess is there's an inquisition going on in Trump Tower.
Oh, I think there are electric batteries, and can you imagine the crazy Fuhrer fit going on right now inside the? Oh my goodness! So let's look at the next 10, 15 days here. Next big thing will be the VP debate, which will be a good time to get dental surgery because it is not going to be very exciting, I believe. I don't think the stakes will be that high. I think Pence is going to, if Trump keeps this meltdown increasing every day, is going to have a bumpy time trying to explain some of that away. But the real fulcrum is going to be the next debate with the two of them. You've done a lot of debate prep. What would you tell her?
First of all, you've got the way it's a town hall debate.
Right, different dynamic.
There are going to be questions from the audience, and they're going to be questions that are submitted online, and then people are going to be able to vote on which ones they want to ask. And there'll be 30 of those, and then the moderators will pick from those, as they also know as you have an influence in terms of who gets to ask a question in the audience. So you do want to game out what you think people are going to ask. But she's got to prepare fundamentally for all these hot button issues. I would be stunned if he goes into this debate and doesn't get asked about his taxes. And I would be stunned if he goes into this and doesn't get asked about his attitudes toward women. And he seems at this point to be barreling straight down the road toward attacking Bill Clinton and attacking Hillary Clinton as an enabler, which I think will be a complete disaster for him.
What's your pitch to her of how to handle a fastball, real person question about not being honest about Benghazi in the email?
Well, I think she has to say, I thought she did very well in the emails in the last debate. I think she has to say, look,
she has to let the gas out of the tank and say, I screwed up.
I made a mistake, and I'm not going to make any excuses, and I take full responsibility. Benghazi's a different matter. I don't know what the question is. If she gets asked, I think she has to say, look, it was a terrible tragedy. The security should have been better. And I was the Secretary of State, although I was not in charge of that. And I've testified repeatedly now. And Hal Rogers, who's the former Republican chairman of the Intelligence Committee, said there's nothing there in terms of me.
I don't know if she's capable of saying it, but if she would say that the best thing about having experience is not knowing how to get things done in government, that's very important. The best thing is you make mistakes and you learn from them. You have that experience.
I think that would be a great line for her. And I'll tell you, would she
say it though?
Well, I don't know. She did it on the emails up to this debate, the first debate. She had a legalistic, defensible explanation on the emails.
Yeah, but it was depth politically.
She threw it all away, and she said it was a mistake. I take full responsibility for it. I'm making no excuses. And by the way, the no excuses line is a terrific line because it means when you get asked the next question, well, why did you do it? She said, look, I'm not, she could say, look, I'm not going to get into that. I'm not making any excuses. We didn't think a lot about it. We should have thought a lot about it.
In fact, that phrase seems familiar to me, Bob. Was there a book A book with that title? Who wrote it, you know?
Yeah.
Might have been you.
Yeah,
on Amazon.
Yeah.
Anybody wants to learn more about the long and interesting career of Bob Shrum in American politics, no excuses, available in your bookstore or favorite online book vendor. So let's talk a little more about the big finish of the campaign here. Do you think Trump will carry any of the swing states, and I'll define them as New Hampshire, Colorado, Florida, Virginia, North Carolina, which is, iffy as a swing state, or Ohio?
I think he might carry one of them.
I think he'll carry North Carolina potentially. I don't think he's going to make it in Ohio. A lot of ours think he will. I don't think he's ever going to carry Colorado, New Hampshire, and I don't think he's going to carry Florida.
I just think the odds are that he carries one of them.
See, I think
unless it completely falls apart.
Well, the current trajectory, we're seeing. It could go either way.
But it was doing that before. It was falling apart before, and then she had a bad week. Now, I don't think there was ever a Trump surge. I think there was a Clinton deflation.
Yeah, that's what I see.
She went down.
Yeah. He tends to be the atomic clock of the losing 42 or 43. Well, she hovers between 48 doing great and 45 not doing great, and then the media says tied race.
Right.
But she
the
seems
media
to be
we've lived with this for so long. The media have such an interest in a horse race.
Oh, totally. Yeah, they're in the business of a horse race.
They manufacture. Although this year they probably could just turn the camera on and show Trump, and people would watch.
That's the commerce. He's a pre-aware television title. I think the media head scratching after the election now is so predictable, which is, why do we pay so much attention to Trump? He was kind of like going to lose forever. He was crazy. But if Hillary Clinton wins, what's the future of the Democratic Party for the last 4 to 5 years? You have all that tension on the Bernie Sanders left, which I think you're a good American liberal, but even I think Bernie makes you a little nervous. But there's real power there in the party. And then there's the more pragmatic wing like Hillary and some of her allies. How will that play out in the next 4 to 5 years?
Well, look, I think she will push for a $15 an hour minimum wage. I don't have any doubt about that. I think she'll push this plan for debt-free college for the middle class, and that will take the Bernie people, and they'll be energized by that. I think she'll have a very difficult time passing anything. Republicans will probably decide to repeat the same strategy that they had with Obama when Mitch McConnell on Inauguration Day in 2009 said, we're going to spend the next 4 years trying to defeat this guy.
Right, which he was reading Tom Daschle's mind from the past. But yes, that's kind of the job of the majority leader. I think that's a politicized McConnell thing where Mitch doesn't get quite enough fairness. That's what the loyal opposition does.
I'm not even accusing him of anything. I'm just saying that's what happened. So I think that she will have a very difficult time with issues that require legislative action.
Right.
My guess is that Paul Ryan, who probably wants to run in 2020, would also like to get some things done, and that she would be willing to sit down and see if they could get done. But Obama was willing to sit down with Boehner, and Boehner got spanked by his own caucus before he got driven out for coming close to making a deal with the president on entitlements and tax reform.
Right. Though I've always thought that Nancy was going to get spanked by her caucus the next day after Boehner. I think there's some symmetry to that between the rank and file on both sides.
But Nancy has a lot of credibility with the liberals in the caucus.
A bit of a whip. I mean, she might be able to force some stuff. No, I agree. I think Ryan will try to get things done. And I think the big decision for Hillary, which will be a tough one, is you try to triangulate against some of your kooky left and deal with the unreliable Republicans and try to do it that way, or do you tilt over and try to unify your side where you've got more votes, but you're going to lose all the Republicans? Do you take a chance on a Ryan move?
I think you take a chance on a Ryan move. I mean, some of the things he wants to do, like a form of privatization of Medicare, you can't even begin to consider. But there are things that you can work on together. Infrastructure is a huge, huge example of that.
They could do Davis-Bacon reform. I think there's a big deal to be had there.
But the infrastructure needs are so great, and people know it. I don't think you do it, though, in the triangulating way that Bill Clinton was practicing in the 1990s. You don't want to invite division in your own party or even potentially a primary challenge in 2020.
That was my next question. What do you think the odds are she has a generational even primary challenge?
Very low.
If she's successful.
Very low. Look, she will have power in a whole number of areas: Supreme Court appointments, foreign policy, executive orders, which, by the way, are not.
1,000 of my listeners just went from undecided back to Trump when you said Supreme Court. Hugh Hewitt is vibrating somewhere just by telepathy.
But she's going to appoint, I mean, the Republican Party is, in my view, imprisoned by its obsession with social issues. And the best thing that could happen to the party would be if those social issues were kind of put to rest. And if you had a Supreme Court majority that was secure enough that you knew that basic women's rights and LGBT rights were not going to be challenged, then maybe, and then, you have Ted Cruz say, well, we'll amend the Constitution, which is never going to happen. But the Republican Party at some point, somehow or other, has to get beyond these. Just as Bill Clinton took Democrats in 1992 to a new place.
If we ever want to see a vote under 40, we got to move on gay marriage. It's the most obvious Blako math in the world, but some of the incentives that are primary fold of older people, it has been a problem. But it is killing us, and we're going to learn that lesson yet again. So what are you doing now? You've given up politics, except not really. You're an astute observer. I see you on television. You still do a little writing on it. But what else are you up to?
Well, I'm the Warshaw Chair in Practical Politics and Professor of the Practice of Politics at the University of Southern California. I have very smart students, really like what I'm doing. This was a point in my life when I thought I might be retired, and I'm anything but. I'm teaching a course to over 100 students right now called 2016 in Real Time. And let me tell you, it was a great idea, but the amount of prep you have to do, and you have to keep prepping all the way up until the class.
Yeah, because it's real time.
Yeah, you're in real time.
Like you're doing.
They gave me 2016 and last week's stuff.
The tax return politics starting tomorrow morning of every presidential race. Well, that's fantastic. I'll bet in your academic career now, a lot of these kids come up to you and say, how do you break into politics? How do you get started as a young person? What do you tell them?
I tell them about the pathways, how you could do it. But I also tell them something I think is very important. I don't know if you're going to agree with this. You got to have luck.
Oh, yeah.
You got to have a break. Larry Tribe writing a letter to someone in Lindsay's office and someone in Teddy Kennedy's office, that was a break. I mean, I never wrote a speech before, and suddenly, I did write speeches, but they weren't for politicians. And so you got to have luck. I think that's true, by the way, when you go into politics. If you go into it, you have to recognize that this is a business that every 2 years can break your heart.
Totally. Yeah, it is a heartbreaking business. Everybody thinks we're all a bunch of horrible cynics. We're actually all idealists who work in a very cynical world and constantly get our hearts broken, but, come back for more. I totally agree on luck. I tell them all the same stuff. I also say, when in doubt, don't make a beeline to Washington, D.C. Go to a state capital. There's often more luck to be had there. It's a little more porous, and you can kind of learn politics. You'll find your way to Washington later if you have those experiences. Are there any books you tell them to read that were particularly useful to you as a young politico?
Well, I would tell them to read, I would tell them to read history very seriously.
Yeah, I do that too.
Read Lincoln's speeches, Kennedy's speeches, Roosevelt, Reagan, read the biographies of those folks. I think it's really important to have a deeper grounding than just politics. So that's why I think history is so important. And you're never going to be a good writer, for example, if that's what you want to do, unless you read. You're never going to be a good strategist unless you have some sense of perspective and you understand that history didn't start when you were about 16.
Yeah, no, history is the greatest teacher.
It's been around a long time.
Yeah.
And I could give them a list of, look, everybody should read Machiavelli's The Prince, which is not as cynical a book as people. We have the phrase Machiavellian, and
No, it's more about the reality of power in politics than the cynical exercise of it.
Arthur Schlesinger's 3-volume history of Roosevelt, which unfortunately he never finished because he did all the research and then got very involved in the Kennedy administration, all sorts of other stuff the rest of his life, and the other 2 volumes never got written. But books like that are very important. I think everybody should read. All the people who discount Ronald Reagan as a dummy should read his letters.
Mistake.
Should read his letters.
I couldn't agree more.
Because he wrote those letters.
Yeah.
And I think by the time he became president, he was conserving his energy. So he was only paying attention to 2 or 3 things, like the Russians, taxes, size of government. And he was doing some deals on the side. He did a deal with Tip O'Neill on Social Security, Teddy Kennedy on immigration. Now, it had some tragic aspects to it because there were some whack jobs in your party who were in charge of social issues in the White House and wouldn't recognize the problem that AIDS presented. And, I don't think that would have been Reagan's attitude if it came to him directly, but I don't think he was paying any attention. But I think people should read his letters. Read, and also if you want to write speeches, read good speeches.
Yeah, no, I agree. People forget that we govern with speeches. They're the fundamental governing document that set the agenda, and you got to read them.
It's a little tougher now because the bully pulpit has become a bully lectern with the fragmentation of media.
You can't hold the attention like you used to. And I think, with some exceptions, the speech writing has become more cliched. But maybe there'll be a renaissance of that. I know. I think most political language has become more cliched. Bob, where can people follow you on the interweb? The kids today, they're hot on that stuff.
I'm on Twitter.
What's your Twitter handle?
@Bob Shrum.
Okay, well, that's pretty easy to remember. See, once a message guy once, a message guy always, right to the point, @Bob Shrum. Thank you for doing Radio Free GOP.
Loved it. Thanks.
It's number one for rumors and fun. It's Resistance Podcasting, Radio Free GOP.
I want to thank Bob Shrum for being our interview guest. Bob has sent me a list of the books we talked about in the interview. We are going to post them on our website, radiofreegop.com, so you budding speechwriters can take a look and get a little advice from one of the best in the business. I also want to thank our listeners for the incredibly good reviews we keep getting on iTunes. Those really help us because they put a little English on the Apple algorithm, which introduces the podcast to new people every week. Tell your friends too. I am proud and happy to say our listenership is growing every week. The Republican resistance continues to get stronger. I've also gotten some emails from people asking me about speeches. Yes, I do speak to groups. I do quite a lot of it. So if you want to see the Mike Murphy Show live, you need to call my speaker agents at the Washington Speakers Bureau. Ask for Annette. Their phone number is 703-684-0555. And finally, if you have any comments, you can reach us. The email is comment@RadioFreeGOP, or follow us, you kids, on the Twitter @RadioFreeGOP, or follow me @MurphyMike. Thank you so much for listening. And there they are, the Orthodoxy Police. I'll tell you, they are not happy about the good reviews we're getting on iTunes, but the Republican resistance cannot be stopped. That's what happens when we nominate a madman for president. So this is Mike Murphy. Thank you so much for listening, and never forget that in the end, victory will be ours.
Radio Free GOP, the resistance sound all can be known.
This has been Radio Free GOP, the voice of the Republican resistance, with your host, Mike Murphy.